Welcome to another great show right here on IT Pro TV. You're watching the CompTIA IT Fundamentals for Exam FC0 U61. I'm your host, Ronnie Wong, and today we're diving into Mac OS, or Apple Mac OS, and little Mac is not a typo, as you actually saw right there on the screen. And here to help us understand why that is, as well as the operating system itself, is Mr. Don Pezet. Don, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me back, Ronnie. And we are continuing on our series on operating systems. We've talked about what operating systems are in general. We took a look at Microsoft Windows, which is the most popular operating system. In this episode, though, we're going to be taking a look at Apple's Mac OS, which has been a fairly small market share operating system over the years, but in recent times has been growing twofold year over year. Like, it's just gaining more and more market share and becoming more and more common. So we're going to take a look at what Mac OS is, how it works, how it came about, and see kind of how it differs in some areas, but is very, very similar to Microsoft Windows, which makes it incredibly easy to use. We have software that we can load. We can make sure that we function and we're able to operate inside of an Apple environment, the Apple ecosystem, all using Mac OS. That's what we're going to take a look at right here in this episode.
All right, so Don, help us to get started. Give us a little bit of a historical background on it, because most people, again, are still interested in that a little bit. And where are we actually going to be taking a look at today?
All right, so let's start off with the name, because you mentioned it. It is a little confusing, and you'll hear people refer to Mac OS as, well, Mac OS. You'll hear people call it Mac OS 10 or OS 10. You'll hear that name kind of thrown about. And it all is tied back to kind of the history, right? So Mac OS is developed by a company called Apple. And Apple has been around since the 70s. If you have not heard of Apple, I don't think it's possible. I think their marketing team has been so effective that everybody's heard of Apple, but it might be because you have an iPhone or an iPad or an Apple Watch. It may not be related to your physical computer at all. But Apple has been a computer company since the 1970s. And they created a series of computers that were designed to give programmers and hobbyists access to their system to be able to do a lot more. Apple was one of the first companies to embrace a graphical user interface. And they released a line of computers called the Apple Macintosh. The Macintosh computers had a GUI. They were easy to use. They had a mouse. You could actually interact with the mouse, not just a keyboard like a lot of other vendors were doing at the time. And the Macintosh computer is what has evolved over the years to be what we now call a Mac, right? So when I say it's an Apple Mac, that's actually just short for Apple Macintosh. But it's not me abbreviating it. Apple themselves no longer use the Macintosh term anywhere. Like, when you look at all of their marketing and branding and so on, you don't see Macintosh, but that is where that originally came from. So the Macs, they've evolved quite a bit over the years, as well as the operating system that runs on them. When we talk about a Mac, we're talking about the hardware. And the operating system that runs on top of it, well, when the original Macintosh came out, that was called Mac OS. And it was called Mac OS for many, many years. And then Apple decided to make a change at one point. Macs used to use proprietary processors. They used a processor that was called a PowerPC. It was a different type of CPU than anybody else was using at the time. And well, I mean, there were a few people, but on a mainstream basis, nobody else was using it. It was a very powerful processor. But it made Macs very different. That's why they had to have their own operating system. You couldn't run Microsoft Windows on a Mac. The processor is just different. Well, they decided to make a change to move to standard processors, to Intel-based processors. And when they made that change, that made it where the hardware was very similar to what Microsoft Windows runs on. And Mac OS changed at that time as well. And they rebranded it. Instead of calling it Mac OS, they called it OS 10. And it was called OS 10. It's actually written OS and the letter X. It's the Roman numeral for 10. And it was called OS 10 for well over 10 years. And only recently, actually about 2 years ago, maybe just 1 year ago, really, not too long ago, Apple decided to go back to the old name, back to Mac OS. So when you hear people say OS 10, they're not wrong. This is a recent change. So some people call it Mac OS, some people call it OS 10. The original name was Mac OS. It moved away. Now it's back again. And so now it's called Mac OS. And they're doing that to line up with their mobile operating systems. The iPhone and iPad, they run what's called iOS, right? The lowercase I, capital O, capital S. The I for iPhone and iPad. You've got watchOS for the Apple Watch. You've got tvOS for the Apple TV. On the Macs, you have Mac OS for your Mac, right? So it's kind of get the names all synchronized. That's what Apple's working to do. So when you buy a Mac today, it comes with Mac OS, which is just the latest version of OS 10. Same basic idea. When you look at it, you have a graphical user interface, and the user interface is not much different than it was when the system was called OS 10, right? But it is different from the original macOS. The original macOS was a good bit different. But when I look at it, I've got it pulled up here on my system. This is a standard macOS desktop. And if I'm running different versions, the screens might look a little bit different. The wallpaper is always different. Apple uses a different wallpaper in each version. But the icons down here in the dock bar are pretty much the same. Those don't change that much as Apple adds in software and tweaks it a little bit. But if I go up to my Apple menu up top here, I can choose About This Mac, and I can see that I'm running macOS High Sierra. Right? Now, High Sierra is a code name for this particular version. I'm running version 10.13.4. 10.13 is High Sierra. 10.12 was called Sierra by itself. 10.11 was called El Capitan. They have names that go along with it because people have an easier time remembering a name than a number, right? I'm not going to remember 10.13, but I can remember macOS High Sierra, right? So it's a little bit easier. So that makes things a little bit confusing on the names, but it's all designed to be, well, in theory, simple. It's just macOS. That's it. I'm not having to worry about all the other details. Apple's design methodology is that they want the system to be easy, right? They have this marketing slogan where they say, it just works, right? You press the power button, you get into the operating system, and you can get to work right away. It's designed to be intuitive and easy to learn. That if somebody's never used a computer before, they can come in, look at it, and they say, wait a minute, here's this button down here, and if I click on that, it's going to launch the program, and they don't have to learn. They don't have to take a course to learn how to use macOS. They can just stumble through and figure it out. That's the goal. And that's how they launched the Macintosh line way back in the 1980s, all the way to today, where the Mac is their standard computer line. This is the main computer product. They actually do sell more iPhones than Macs, which is kind of a weird business model. But the Macs themselves are very reliable, very stable computers that are very intuitive and easy to use. That's really all a part of what macOS stands for.
Now, Don, in the idea of the user interface, I know that in the previous episode where we talked about Windows a little bit, we talked about the idea of an Explorer. Is there something very similar to that inside of the macOS?
Sure. When I look at macOS, the user interface that I'm seeing is actually called Aqua, right? The Aqua interface. When Apple switched from the original macOS over to OS X, this UI was developed called Aqua that was designed to be smooth and liquidy, right? Everything was everything used to look like little raindrops. Everything had curved edges and little lighted bezels and fancy artifacts. It's changed a lot over the last decade, and now things are a lot more flat. Like the dock bar down here, see how it's just kind of this flat gray background, and that's it. It used to be that it looked like glass and kind of reflected a little bit, and they do little screen element changes like that. But the interface is still the Aqua interface, but you really don't hear people mention that. What most people mention when they talk about the interface is they'll call it the Finder, right? But the interface is not the Finder. The Finder is just something that runs inside of it. The Finder helps you locate applications and files on your system. So it is what we interact with a lot. And there's two main ways to interact with the Finder. The first way is with the icon right here. This icon, this smiley face with two halves, that's actually the Macintosh icon. But they use it for the Finder application because it's kind of the primary application that we run. If I click on that, it's going to launch the Finder, and now I can browse through my storage to find any documents, downloads, applications, and other things that I might have on my system. It makes it where I can easily locate information and work with it. So this becomes like one of our primary ways of interacting with the computer. It also has the ability to do a search. You see a little search that's right here in the top, or I didn't even have to do that. If I was way back here on my desktop and I wanted to find that HP Easy Start that we saw in my documents, you've got a little magnifying glass up here in your top bar that you can click, and it takes you to the Spotlight search. Spotlight is a system hooked into the Finder that is indexing all of our files, all of our applications, all of our folders to make it easy to find. But not just that, it's also indexing things on the web so that we can do searches across the internet. If I want to search for that HP Easy Start and I type in HP Easy, it found HP Easy Start right there on my system and I can run it, right? But maybe that's not what I wanted. Now I can look down a little bit further and we can find other websites. Maybe I'm trying to find support.hp.com, right? So it's searching both. And as you use the computer, the Spotlight learns a little bit more about stuff you frequently access, stuff you infrequently access, and these search results get more and more and more accurate over time so that it becomes very, very robust. So when we interact with macOS using the Finder and using Spotlight, Those are two tools that make things really simple, and that's really how we're interacting. But it's all being delivered via the Aqua user interface to make it look nice on our screen. That when I launch a window like this, it's got certain elements to it. Some elements are just pretty, right? Like this little drop shadow here in the background. See that shadow? And as I move this around, see how the shadow moves as well? That's the Aqua interface redrawing that shadow. And it gives us these three buttons. The red button to close the window, the yellow button to minimize it and get it out of the way, and the green button to go full screen. If I'm browsing the web, for example, and I know I'm going to be browsing the web for a while, I'm going to be looking at Yahoo's webpage today, so I'm going to be on this for a little while, I can hit that green button to go full screen, and when I do that, it's going to, think about it for a second, there we go, it's going to go full screen, and all the other screen elements disappear, right? My status bar up at the top, the dock down at the bottom, they all disappear, and now I'm just looking at the web browser. I'm using the web browser, so give it the whole screen. Let me get the most screen real estate possible out of it. Now, once that's done, I'm in here, I'm able to browse around, and I can actually access more than one application while I'm in here. You actually have a whole workspace system in place that lets me kind of launch these applications and switch in between them, right? Switching between windows is an important part of any user interface and facilitates making it where we can access these. Now, when you go full screen, it's kind of like, how do I multitask? How do I launch another program if I'm stuck here in full screen? Well, you have a system, which actually, you know what? I might not be able to show there. Let me jump over here. This is my actual laptop, and I'm going to launch like Safari, and if I take it full screen, once it's full screen and it's filling up everything, you can do this little 3-finger swipe gesture on your touchpad, and it lets you move in between the different environments. So I can go to the Safari window I just launched, or I can go over to VMware Fusion where I'm seeing that Yahoo window that I had. I can move in between these. And the user interface is providing me the ability to do that through simple gesture control, a couple of finger swipes on a touchpad, or clicking a button up in my top bar or whatever. That's all powered by the user interface. And giving you things like gestures on the keyboard, that's designed to be easily accessible for people. I'm not having to remember, oh, I need to hit Control, Command, X. I just swipe 3 fingers, right? That's something simple people can interact with. That's really part of that design methodology of macOS, and you see it carried through everywhere, trying to make things as easy as possible.
Now, Don, as we take a look as well, since you mentioned the idea of Finder, I did notice that it showed like the hard drive of the computer. Are we still going to see things like drive letters here or anything like that?
Oh, sure. So in Microsoft Windows, when we had drives, they showed up with a drive letter. I had a C drive and a D drive. Apple doesn't do that. Apple just gives them a name. It makes a little more sense, right? So your Mac will likely have a hard drive in it. Otherwise, it won't turn on. And so it's got a hard drive. And that hard drive is usually just called Macintosh HD. There's that Macintosh name, kind of sneaks in on us. When I come into my Finder, that's not what I see, right? When I go into my Finder, I see my recent files, my applications, my desktop. This is stuff that I go to every day, right? But it actually does see my drive. It's just hidden from me because your average user doesn't need to browse to their regular drive, right? Up in my top menu up here, you'll see the Go menu. And under Go, you'll see those same places that you can navigate. But there's one extra one in the list, Computer. And if I click on that to go to my computer, now I see the Macintosh HD sitting right there. And I can browse into it, and I can start navigating that file system and seeing my storage and so on. But that being said, we don't really mess with most of these folders. The folder that we mess with is our home folder. If I go into users, and I go into dpossessed, that's my user account, I go in there, and now I see documents, downloads, desktop, which I also see over here. So I didn't really need to navigate to the drive to do it, right? Apple says, hey, we're going to make this easy for you and give you a quick way to get to it and not have to worry about the drive. But if I start plugging in additional hard drives, they'll all show up under that computer window where I was just a moment ago. So if I choose Go and Computer, they'll all show up in here, and they'll just have a name, whatever they're named. I name mine easy things like Time Machine or Storage or whatever, depending on what I'm going to use it for. My storage one, that's where I keep files. My Time Machine one, that's where I put my Time Machine backups. And those names are easy to address. I don't have to look at it and say, oh, look, there's an S drive. What is S? S might stand for storage, might stand for something else. I don't know. So here we just have a name, and that makes life a lot easier. Apple uses what are called mount points. These are actually getting mounted to a file system. And to give you guys an idea what this looks like if we did it the hard way, let me drop to the terminal. When we use macOS, what we see is the Aqua user interface, and it is smooth and easy and intuitive, and anybody can figure it out, right? But in the background, macOS is actually running BSD Unix. It's running a very powerful server operating system, but it just has a super easy UI stuck on top of it. And if I drop down to that basic operating system that's behind the scenes, I can start to kind of unravel the mystery of what all is going on. And when I look in the file system in here, I can find where there's that Macintosh hard drive, where it's mounted to the file system. And anytime I plug in another drive, it's doing this. It's mounting them here. Fortunately, you don't have to do what I just did. You don't have to drop to the terminal and navigate into this to find it, because the UI shows it. We see it in the graphical user interface through the Finder, and we don't have to navigate through this, right? But this is the actual operating system behind the scene. You know, we talk about Mac OS, but the kernel for Mac OS, the actual operating system, is built upon BSD Unix, and it's called Darwin. That if I do this is a Unix command, ask it for its Unix name, it tells me this is the Darwin kernel. So that is a very powerful, very stable, very robust operating system that is very un-user-friendly. Like most users could not even run a program inside of Darwin. Better yet, actually operate on a normal basis. Apple uses that, though, because it's stable and it's powerful and it's a network operating system through and through, and it is very robust. And then where their real claim to fame is they take that nightmare of a difficult OS and then they turn it into the easiest operating system to use on the planet, Mac OS. It's simple. You can stick it in front of your grandparents, and they can dive in and start to get things done with just a moderate level of clicking around and exploring. They can figure it out. We don't have to have documentation and things. That's a big deal.
Now, Don, the idea here also, if I create a file, can I take a file from like this Mac OS and move it to a Windows system?
You can, as far as like copying a file via the network, but as far as a hard drive, you can't necessarily move a hard drive from a Mac to a Windows machine and back and forth. When we talk about Windows, we talked about their file system they have, the NTFS, or New Technology File System. Well, Apple has their own file systems. They have the High Performance File System, or HFS. They also have, well, HFS is usually called Mac OS Extended, is what a lot of people call it. They also have a new one, which is called the APFS, or the Apple File System. Those file systems are different than what you have in Microsoft Windows, but they provide very similar functionality. When I launch my Finder and I start browsing through the hard drive, I'm browsing through my file system. It's telling it what folders are here and what files are inside of that. It's all learning that from the file system. And when I have files like my HP Easy Start here, that in the file system, it's keeping track of various settings and options. Like I can give them color tags. The file system is allowing it to keep track of what those file tags are. It's called metadata. It's tracking that metadata. And you'll see other options in here, like the ability to lock a file or so on. We can set permissions on a file and control who can access it. So very similar to NTFS, where it gives us the same kind of functionality, Apple's file system is doing that as well. It's just doing it in a way that's not really observant. We don't see it, right? But if I were to do something like go into the disk utility, I launch the disk utility, and I take a look at my disk, I can see it right here that this one's actually formatted with the Apple file system, APFS. And APFS is not supported by Windows, just like NTFS from Windows is not supported by Apple, right? They're proprietary. They're tied to their own operating systems. So I always have to be aware that this is a function of Mac OS. The APFS, the Apple file system, is only supported by Mac OS. So if you want APFS, you've got to run Mac OS.
Now, Don, what about the idea of applications too? So is this actually something that's going to be a little bit more difficult since you said the operating system is such a nightmare to work with?
You know, Apple's done a great job of making it super easy to install applications. On the Windows side, we had to download an installer and run it and click through a wizard and so on. On the Apple side, they do what are called application bundles. Let me show you how this works. If you watch the Windows episode, I downloaded a program called Sublime Text and I installed it. Well, let's do that same thing here on the Mac side. So I'm going to go and download Sublime Text. So it's going to download. So there it goes. It's going to go into my downloads folder. And let me just pull that up. So it is downloading right now. And that installer, when I run that installer, it's going to open it up as if it was another hard drive. And so it's going to open right up, and I'm going to see this virtual disk. It's like a fake hard drive. Here's the application Sublime Text, and here's a shortcut to my applications folder. So to install Sublime Text, I just drag it and drop it on the applications folder, right? And that just installed Sublime Text. I've actually got it installed, and it's running. Well, it's not running yet. If I go into my applications folder, though, I can find Sublime Text in here. I can double-click on it, and it's going to launch. And, it's going to give me a warning saying this was downloaded from the internet. Am I sure I want to run it, right? Do I trust it? I can hit open, and then it's going to pop up, and pop up right there. And now I'm in Sublime Text, right? So now I can work. I can start typing text, and so on. It's installed, and it was easy, right? And then if I decide that I don't want it anymore, I'm done with Sublime Text, I want to uninstall it, I just take that icon, and I drag it, and my head's actually going to cover this up. So down in the bottom right corner of my screen, I can take that and I can drag it down to my trash bin. And I can just drop it off there and it deletes it. And now I've uninstalled Sublime Text. It's designed to be easy, right? And that was, you're just dragging and dropping the file. That installs the program and uninstalls the program. And it's even easier if I use the App Store, right? If I fire up Apple's App Store, I can come in here and I can find applications and install them. But the problem here, I don't think Sublime Text is actually in, it's not in here. So the software that I want is not here in the App Store. But if the software I want is in the App Store, like maybe I want Textastic, I can come in and I can download it. Here it's $7.99. I have to buy it. But you can install it, and now it's just done right here through point and click, and you're done. You don't even have to drag and drop the file, right? But really easy to get software put into macOS.
All right, Don. The idea here, once we actually get that software installed and everything is good, and the uninstall actually finishes happening, do we still have the same issues like what I had mentioned maybe previously here, where applications can close and still be running in the background? And can I see something like that if that happens?
They can, right? So it's a multitasking operating system. You guys see me moving between windows here as I still have my disk utility running in the background. I forgot about it. Or with Sublime Text, if I'll install it again. Once it's installed, I can run in and maybe it's floating in the background. In macOS, it's actually really easy to forget that you left a program running. Because, for example, if I close this window, right? It's going to ask if I want to save it. I'm not going to, and I close it. Notice up here in my taskbar, it still says Sublime Text is running. I closed the window I was working in, but the program is indeed still running, and that's because I might want to come in here and create a new file, and now I'm right back into it, right? Well, if you want to see what's running on your Mac, you easily see it down here in your dock. The dock has actually gotten bigger. It gets bigger on the right under my head. But when I ran Sublime Text down here, you'll see it added it to the list, and there's the disk utility, and they've got a little dot beneath them letting me know that they're actually running. If I launch the App Store, now it's got a dot beneath it. So that's one way to keep track of what's running on your system and to know if an application is still out there doing something. We also have the activity monitor. If I fire up the activity monitor, it's very similar to the task manager in Windows. I can see all the programs that are running on my computer, and I can come in here and look. I'll just sort it alphabetically here. And I can look and see, is Sublime Text running? And if I poke around, I should be able to find it. There it is. There's Sublime Text still running in the background on mine. And I see a lot of other things too. I see applications that I run, but I also see services and other processes that are running in the background that are just trying to make life easier for me, right? Some things like Spotlight. Spotlight is indexing the storage on my system so I can search and find things. So Spotlight needs to run in the background so that it can find stuff, right? Software update. It's running software updates to make sure that my system stays up to date. If there's a vulnerability, a virus, or whatever, Apple will push an update out to make sure that I don't get infected. The software updates run in the background and do that. That's all being powered by macOS. It's taking care of managing all of that for me so that I don't have to worry about it.
Don, the idea of user accounts, is that also something we can do with Apple?
Sure, yeah. Because this is built on top of Unix, which is a multi-user operating system, macOS is a multi-user operating system as well. It carries over that feature. Right now, I'm just logged in as me. And when you get a brand new Mac and you set it up the first time, it walks you through a basic series of setting up your first user account. So you have one user account. But if you want more, you can just go into your system preferences. If I hit my Apple up top and I go to System Preferences, I'll see a lot of settings that I can configure and change here in my system. Very similar to the control panel in Windows, here I have the system preferences for a Mac. And way down here at the bottom, I've got users and groups. I can dive into that. And here I see my user account, Don Pezet. There's also a guest account that's disabled by default. It's off. So there's just one user account. And I can come in and I can add more. Now, I need to be an administrator to do it. So the tool is locked. I'm going to unlock that and provide my password so it knows that I'm an administrator. And once I authenticate, now I can add in more users. So I can just hit the little plus here, and I'll create an account for Ronnie. So I'm going to create that account and just provide a password for him to use. And then I'll create that user. And there we go. He appears right there. He's a standard user. It picked a golf ball for you, Ronnie. You can change your icon if you want from something like a golf ball to, I don't know. Here, we'll go sunflower. When I see Ronnie, I think sunflowers. So there we go. So so we set the icon up. But the important part here is not the sunflower.
Right.
The important part is that my user account might have my documents, my private information, things that I want to share with Ronnie. And when Ronnie logs in, I want him to have his own experience, his own documents. Maybe he hates this wallpaper. He hates nature and doesn't want to look at mountains and craziness. He wants something more simple. Well, maybe I like the mountains. I want to keep it. He can log in as himself, and he will see his own background environment. So I'm going to switch over to Ronnie's account this time. And that's going to take me to the login screen so he can log in. And when he logs in, he'll see his environment, which is separate from mine. So now I have data privacy. We have a customized experience that's tailored to each of us. And now we can use the computer our own way and know that our data is secure. Now, he's logging in technically for the first time. So it has to set up a few basic things, just building his profile. I'm going to just try and skip through this as quickly as I can so we don't go through it. They want you to set up an Apple ID and configure iTunes and all this other crazy stuff. So we'll skip past that. Microsoft does the same thing. They want you to set up a live ID and all that. But here I am. So now I'm at Ronnie's desktop. And I mentioned he hated the wallpaper, right? So let's go and change that wallpaper. Maybe you're going to go to space. So there we go. Ronnie's got a space background. That's what he wants, right? But now when I come to the computer, I can switch over to my user account. And when I log in as me, I got the mountains back, right? We each have our own experience. That's a key thing, especially in a business environment where users need to have their own space for storing data, keeping it secure and private. For a home user, maybe you don't care. You just use a single account. But for businesses, you almost always need to have multiple user accounts like this.
All right, Don. Well, thank you again for walking us through the very beginning here of setting up the idea of the Apple Mac OS. It's a lot of information, something that we should get familiar with as well. So, Don, leaving you with the very last words on the subject itself once again, what do we have here?
All right, macOS is actually a really powerful operating system. It can do a heck of a lot more than what we saw right here in this one episode. This was really just designed to be a primer, a quick preview of the operating system. If you want to learn more about macOS, it's covered in the CompTIA A+ exam, a little bit more as far as like troubleshooting and how the OS works. So you'll get to see it some more there. And Apple has their own certifications. There's the Apple Certified Support Associate and Apple Certified Support Professional. So definitely check those out, and you can learn a ton about all the capabilities that macOS has, how it functions, and how it does what it does. But as far as operating systems go, know that macOS is designed to be the easiest to use, but it's also designed to run just on Apple's hardware. So you have a much more limited use case scenario for where you can use macOS versus some of the other operating systems that are out there.
All right, thank you, Don, for helping us out here, and thank you also for watching. Signing off for IT Pro TV, I'm your host, Ronnie Wong.
And I'm Don Pezet.
Stay tuned right here for more of the CompTIA IT Fundamental Show.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.